It means earning your success, feeling like you're creating value and you're rewarded and recognized for it, but also serving other people. Now, everybody in your network is serving other people. And what I find is that financial advisors in relatively small firms where they have contact with the client, that's incredibly satisfying. It's stressful sometimes because the clients freak out. It's like, the market is down 3%, all hands on deck, and so they have to be good psychologists. But it's so satisfying to see a teacher be able to retire in security and they wouldn't have otherwise. And to say, look, if you hadn't done this and you've been trying to manage your own portfolio, it's just such a big difference in how expertise can work and you can really serve. And so small businesses that are client focused are great at that, but not everybody has this sense of service to other people. The other thing that's important is making sure that your employees have a sense of service. That means they're meeting the clients. They're seeing the look on the face of somebody who's able to retire in security who otherwise wouldn't have been able to, and the gratitude that they actually have.
This is the Business of Advice podcast, where we help good advisors become great business owners.
Today is a special edition of the Business of Advice podcast. We're here at our Advisors Excel Leadership Summit. Anytime we have an incredible speaker, I like to grab them and bring them in. So Dr. Arthur Brooks is with us. Just crushed it on stage talking about your new book that is out. But as I shared, your books are something I've been reading for a while. I mentioned From Strength to Strength and just how much I've appreciated that book. So
thanks, Cody. Appreciate it. Wonderful to be with you. What a great group today. What a great company and with a great spirit. I just loved it.
Well, and I think, a nice thing about doing these right after is we get to talk about some of the things that you talked about. So your new book is really focused on happiness. I think part of the reason we had you in, successful, hard-charging entrepreneurs, right, have a lot of stress and responsibility on them, and just shared some things about what they can do to manage their emotions better. Right. So maybe just high level, we'll start off, talk about the new book. I know you wrote it with Oprah. It's selling like crazy. So
no, it's been great. Happiness is my main area of study. I'm a social scientist by background, and I teach a class called Leadership and Happiness at the Harvard Business School. So, human happiness, believe it or not, has got a huge body of scientific literature behind it, of neuroscience and social psychology and behavioral economics, et cetera. So it's not like something I made up. However, putting it together in a particular way to help business leaders, that is a kind of an interesting turn on that. And that's what I've specialized in is, the kind of the people that we were talking about in your audience today, business owners, hard-charging strivers, people that know a lot about business, but they don't know necessarily that much about the business of what's going on between their ears. And self-management is a different kettle of fish than business management. It has a lot of similarities to it, but helping people understand that they can manage their emotions and don't have to be managed by their emotions is revelatory, and then giving them the techniques to do so is a lot of what I was talking about and what I write about these days.
One of the things that you talked about a little bit, or you talk about the 4 pillars of happiness,
right.
And you say, family, friendship, work, and faith. Maybe I'll ask if you want to just talk about those 4 things. Is one more important than the other? How do we balance those?
Well, everybody listening to us is pretty familiar with and comfortable with the idea of a diversified portfolio.
Very true.
If I'm an economist, but not to say that I'm doing my own investing, by the way. I got a guy because it's important. But if I went to my investment advisor and I said, "Hey, I'm thinking of putting my entire retirement in Greek bonds," he'd be like, "That's dumb."
Yep.
It might work out, but I certainly wouldn't recommend
won't.
this. It probably won't. Put it all in Bitcoin, brother. That's a problem. You need a diversified portfolio of smart investments, and that's how to think about your happiness as well. There's a million things that you can do, and a lot of fringy, faddish things that you can get off the internet. But really, the bread and butter of having a happy life is investing seriously in a diversified, systematic way in 4 things: your faith, your family, your friendship, and your work. Those are the big 4. Now, it takes a little bit of explanation because that could be misunderstood. When I say faith, I don't mean my faith. I'm a Catholic, the most important thing in my life. But as a social scientist, I can assure everybody listening that it's not even necessarily a traditional or even a religious faith. But that's just a placeholder for something that's transcendental, that gives you some relief from the psychodrama of your day-to-day life. We walk around and Mother Nature wants us to be hyper-focused on ourselves, like Cody's job and Cody's money and Cody's lunch and it's like it'll drive you mad, man.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy, and so the result is you need something that will zoom you out and make you small. You don't get perspective on life unless you're thinking about the bigger verities of the universe, and maybe that comes from your religion, but it might come from a meditation practice or studying the Stoic philosophers or walking in nature or analyzing the fugues of Johann Sebastian Bach. Whatever your thing is, you need something that's awe-inspiring and bigger than you and doing it every day. That's number one.
Yep.
You got to have it. Everybody's got to have it. Number two, and you got to invest in it every day so you get better and better at it. Number two is family life, and this might seem obvious, and a lot of people watching us and listening to us that they're like, yeah, man, my family life is on point, but is it? I mean, you're not listening to this podcast unless you're a hard-charging striver.
Yep.
That's just the fact. I mean, you're not interested in this. You're going to be listening to something else if you're pretty chill about your life. And hard-charging strivers, they can struggle to maintain adequate family relationships. Family relationships are the most mystical kind of love because you didn't choose them. God knows you wouldn't have in a lot of cases. God knows my kids wouldn't have chosen their parents on a lot of days. But, we can drive each other crazy because of that mystical love. Now, there's a lot of neurobiology behind this. There's a hormone, a neuropeptide that functions as a hormone in the brain called oxytocin that bonds us together in these mystical feeling bonds through eye contact and touch, largely with the people with whom we're related. Those are the most intense ones. Yep. But whether or not it's neurobiology or the hand of God, it's super heavy, and we won't be happy if we let schisms happen because we're busy, because we don't care, because stupid things like political differences. It's just so dumb. There's only one reason to have a schism with family, and that's abuse. And, whether somebody voted for Trump, not abuse.
Yeah.
Whether you disagree on politics, not abuse. It's just, and so we can't let those things die. And that means every day working on them. So a lot of people listening to us, it's like, when's the last time you called your mom, your sister? Did you? I mean, you did or you didn't. It's a binary.
Yeah.
Call, take the time. Now, harder even than that, believe it or not, is friendship. Now, most hard-charging strivers have a ton of deal friends and not enough real friends.
Yeah.
And we know the difference. Deal friends are incredibly useful to us. We work with them. They're good for us. They help us, and they're great. But they don't have that beautiful uselessness of real friendship, which is just work for the sake of love. Mm-hmm. You keep up with it. These are the people you went to college with and lost touch with. And a lot of people feel really, really lonely because they're surrounded by deal friends. They don't have enough real friends. This is especially true, like you're a CEO. Yep. It's very easy to not, your only real friend is your wife. 60% of 60-year-old men say their best friend is their wife, and only 30% of their wives say their best friend is their husband. So that's not a great statistic. No. So the key thing is real friends,
not
deal friends.
Not about us as guys either, right?
It says to us that our game is no good.
Yeah.
We got to do the work. And last but not least is work. Now, work doesn't mean striving for worldly success. It means earning your success, feeling like you're creating value and you're rewarded and recognized for it, but also serving other people. Now, everybody in your network is serving other people. And what I find is that financial advisors in relatively small firms where they have contact with the client, that's incredibly satisfying. It's stressful sometimes because the clients freak out. It's like, the market is down 3%, all hands on deck, and so they have to be good psychologists. But it's so satisfying to see a teacher be able to retire in security and they wouldn't have otherwise. And to say, look, if you hadn't done this and you've been trying to manage your own portfolio, it's just such a big difference in how expertise can work and you can really serve. And so small businesses that are client focused are great at that. But not everybody has this sense of service to other people. The other thing that's important is making sure that your employees have a sense of service. That means they're meeting the clients. They're seeing the look on the face of somebody who's able to retire in security who otherwise wouldn't have been able to, and the gratitude that they actually have. That's critically important for us as bosses to do that. So not just earn success and service for us, but also for the people that follow us as leaders is critically important. So faith, family, friends, and work. That's your happiness portfolio.
And people who listen to this regularly will have heard this story multiple times, but I say all the time, you're talking about how meaningful it can be to be an advisor. And I say, outside of maybe doctor, pastor, like you know more about your clients than almost anyone. And,
very intimate.
And it's not just talking them off the ledge when the market's down, but I say, I've been with our advisors when they got the phone call and like their spouse passed away or they've been diagnosed with dementia or cancer, right? And I only share that because going back to that idea of making sure your team sees the meaningful work, I tell them all the time, like, when those happen, I was with Bill Smith. They've heard this story a lot on this podcast, but like I was with him in Sarasota when the client called and their husband had just passed away, and Bill was the first phone call she made. And I told him, I'm like, you got to pull your team together on Monday and tell them, like, here's why we do, why what we do matters, right? It's like,
don't let this moment pass.
We were the first phone call she made because her husband said, Bill, make sure everything's taken care of. So I love that. I want to jump back, and this wasn't a question I was planning to ask, but man, it's just so top of mind. I was in an event with, let's say, 40 or 50 other men that were fairly influential kind of leaders. This was probably 3 weeks ago in Colorado, mountains of Colorado. We're out, in the wilderness.
Nice.
I was blown away by how many of these men had no meaningful friendship or a person in their life that they felt comfortable being able to be. They were pretty open and vulnerable there, but one of the things I challenged, and I'll even put it back to, like, I think everyone who listens to this, it was just a huge takeaway for me. One of the most beneficial things I do, I have 3 other really close friends, and it's combining 2 of these things. Every Thursday morning, we do a men's kind of Bible study.
Right.
We read a different book. Right now, we're reading Experiencing God, and we'll read a few chapters, get together every Thursday morning. But it's just an opportunity for us to, be open and vulnerable. Can you talk about that? Because it's the second event, like, in the past month where I've been to where – and it seems to be a phenomenon right now with men.
Right.
And I don't want to, just say it's only men.
Not men, but
it
men
really feels that way. And any advice that you maybe have and just thoughts around that.
So this is critical. You do find that men tend to be lonelier than women later in life.
Okay.
Part of the reason for that is that friendship takes practice. And men have lots of practice earlier. And then in traditional families, that are structured in a traditional way, women have more contact with people that they don't need at work. Yep. Because they have a contact with the mothers, for example, of their children's friends, and they can make friendships in a natural way. Whereas guys, they're at work, and if they hang out with guys after work, they're cheating their families. So the result is they don't develop those relationships, and they lose the skill. And so guys are kind of like, they feel uncomfortable actually talking about, it's not like you have to talk about your feelings that much. You just have to talk about real things.
Yeah.
And not fake stuff all the time. And, maybe real for you is the Red Sox, but the whole point is something, you got to talk about things that you care about, and they're not used to talking about things that they actually care about with other men. So the result of that is that when you can get a venue together where they are doing that for the first time, it can be quite powerful. Yeah. It can be very emotional, as a matter of fact. And some guys are like, man, this is the first time in a long time. Now, one of the things that's really interesting is that the greatest writer about friendship ever is Aristotle. Believe it or not, that ancient Greek philosophy is as fresh as the day that it was written. And he says there's 3 kinds of friendships. There's friendships of transaction, which are, those are your deal friends, right? There's friendships of beauty or admiration, in which you like somebody because you admire something about them, but that's kind of one-sided too. The best friendships, which he calls the perfect friendships, or friendships of virtue, are that where they're useless. They're just useless. And generally speaking, they're based around a shared love for a third thing. This is why your Bible study is such a good way to do it.
Yeah.
Is because it's a shared love for faith in God and for God. And that shared love, it's kind of like, when your kids were little and before they were super social and they were 2-3 years old, they would do something called parallel play. And that's where they're playing with blocks, sitting next to each other, but not looking at each other. They're playing with something in front of both of them. That's how they socialize. A lot of guys, they need to do parallel play like a 2-year-old.
Yeah.
And the blocks that they're playing with together is that third thing that they're both really interested in, which, faith in God or the Red Sox or building birdhouses. Who am I to say? As a Christian, I know what's most important to me.
Yeah.
And that's a really meritorious thing. But you can also have... one of the ways that couples really bond together so deeply is because they have that shared love for the third thing, which is the kids, is how this works. And that's one of the reasons that couples struggle when their kids grow up and move away, is because the source of their shared third love it's a real problem. And so you need to actually figure out and get a strategy for the shared love for the virtuous friendship that is your marriage as well.
That's really good. And it just, when you were saying that, the other thing we all 3 have, or 4, the other 3 in me, is we are all entrepreneur business owners too, right? So it's like, sometimes, we're not always just talking God. Sometimes it ends up talking business a little bit in the mornings too, but it is,
well, that's part of you and part of your creative endeavor. You're running this super successful company, and presumably your friends are as well, but that's scary. That's anxiety provoking. That brings up a lot of very strong emotions. Entrepreneurial life is incredibly emotionally tumultuous, and it's very important that you have friends. So as a matter of fact, Benjamin Franklin confronted this. And Benjamin Franklin recognized that he couldn't talk. I mean, at one time, he was the richest guy in the colonies. He was an incredible entrepreneur, came from nothing, on his own at 17, went to Philadelphia and started businesses. And he was a very imperfect man, but he was incredibly entrepreneurial. And he figured out along the way that he couldn't talk about the things that were important to him to all the people who worked for him. So he started a thing called the junto. And, the expression the junto actually refers to what Benjamin Franklin did, where he had, 5 or 6 dudes that also were, people that had significant responsibility, but not in his business. Yep. They were people that were in other businesses that they could confide in each other and share ideas. And quite frankly, they could be friends and they didn't need each other to get deals done. That's really important.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Talking about that, the whole business thing, maybe one of the questions I wanted to ask, because you addressed it a little bit, how do you balance this idea of the responsibilities of an entrepreneur and family and just making sure those don't collide or conflict?
Well, there's a natural conflict because, entrepreneurs are people who are very passionate about what they do. But the danger is that it's not entrepreneurship per se, it's work that can actually become a pathology. In 1971, there was a clinical psychologist named Wayne Oates who was so passionate about his work that his kids couldn't get his attention, and his 11-year-old son actually called his secretary to make an appointment with his dad to discuss his report card.
That's not good.
That's not what you're looking for. So he went on to actually study that phenomenon. He coined the term workaholism, and it has the same kind of pathological behaviors as alcoholism. Hiding behavior, defensive behavior. When somebody gets between you and your work, you get mad. You get mad at your spouse who says, I want you to work less. You say, yeah. I mean, it's always the same argument that entrepreneurs are making to their spouse. Yeah. Like, yeah, well, you don't want me to work this much, but you want all the nice things that this work brings. There's a classic thing that everybody winds up saying. But that's actually, workaholism is a secondary addiction for entrepreneurs typically, which is to success. Success is a phenomenon in which you get strokes and compliments for what you do well, which actually hits the same part of the brain called the ventral striatum as drugs and alcohol. All kinds of reward behavior, they touch the same part of the limbic system of the brain. But for entrepreneurs and successful people, it's like when somebody says, boom, deal. When somebody says, that's awesome. When you see the big check, whatever, when you close the deal, get the client, whatever it happens to be, it touches your ventral striatum because that's what you're really good at. Often, entrepreneurs are people that grew up being super strivers in grades, and they were really motivated when they were kids, and they got all their strokes from their parents when they were successful in school and successful in their endeavors or sports or whatever it happened to be, and they never learned how to get the rewards that they needed outside of success. These are very self-objectifying people. I work with entrepreneurs all day long. They tend to see themselves as entrepreneurs, not as people.
Yeah.
And so that's the pathology to start looking at. Am I a cardboard cutout? Am I Mr. or Miss Success? Is that really what it's coming down to? And if that's the case, then you got to deal with that the way that you would any other addiction, with people, perhaps with therapy, but most importantly with recognition and honesty of the fact that you can't feel anything when you're not doing the thing. I was like, I don't feel anything. I don't feel, if I'm not being successful, life is like my mouth is full of straw. I feel useless is what it comes down to. That's evidence of a problem.
Yeah. I want to we've talked about happiness in the new book, but I shared this with you. I started this tradition a few years ago. A friend of mine, Greg Brenneman, who's been on the podcast, go listen to that one if they haven't. He shared this, that he started sharing every year a book with men who were influential in his life or important in his life that he had really enjoyed. And last year, so I've done that for probably 5 years now, but last year I read From Strength to Strength, and that's the book I sent out to, I don't know, there's probably 100 people on the list, and just
thank you.
An incredible book it was useful. That people should read.
That's the Striver's Handbook.
Well, and that's what I was going to ask, because I'm maybe 2 aspects of it here, right? One, most of our advisors work with people who are transitioning into retirement. So oftentimes it is about the money, right? Financial, because they got to figure out we're not going to get a paycheck anymore. Right. How do we make sure that this lasts? But there's an identity component of that too, right? That they're walking away from this thing that's been their identity for so long. Just any thoughts around how to retire? Help? And how maybe even our advisors can help people navigate that a little.
Yeah, so for sure. So I mean, I wrote that book because I want people to understand that they have different strengths at different points in their life. Mm-hmm. But one of the results of writing that book is, it's been out for about a year and a half, and it's I've given a lot of talks on it and met a lot of people. And, I've gotten a lot of calls from, actors and
I can
from
imagine.
athletes and
Athletes, I would see for sure.
And one of the questions that I get is, how do I stop? How do I stop? And I said, well, do you have enough money? And that was the wrong question. It is, I don't know me when I'm not doing that thing, which is a self-objectification problem we just talked about. So there is a way for people who get a lot of their reward from work, but they need to step away from work because they need to take care of their spouse, or they just need to, they can't keep doing this thing forever, or they're getting a shove. Like if you're in corporate America and you're a certain age, there's only two ways you're going to leave the corner office: before you're ready or on somebody else's terms.
Or to run for president.
Or you could run for president. And that's the same thing with if you're a politician, by the way. It's either you leave before you're ready or on somebody else's terms. It's usually, there aren't very many people who leave of their own volition. So if that's the case, how do you actually do that? And there is a way to do it. Now, the one thing that I found with super strivers is that they like their work. They get a lot of reward from it. But there's one thing that everybody listening to this podcast has in common that they hate. And that's they never have time to do what they want. They never have time to relax into something to do it well. They're always in a hurry. It's like, I got to get off this Zoom call and I don't even have time to pee before my next Zoom call. It's incredibly frustrating. It's I can't, I'm at the gym and having a good workout and I got to stop after 50 minutes. I'd like to go for 90 minutes because I'm feeling like in the zone. I'm really enjoying it, but I can't do it. I can't do anything as long as I want to do it. I'm having a good lunch. I'd like it to go a little bit longer, but sorry, man, I got to go. And you're always looking at your watch. Yep. It's maddening for all strivers. The key thing is stop doing that. All you have to do to retire and not be unhappy, you don't stop working. You stop being rushed. Get rid of the rushing in your life. And that means different things for different people, but here's one way to think about it, for people in business. The one thing you're going to want to do when you step away is you're going to want to join 22 boards. Right? 11 nonprofits and 11 for-profits. So you can feel, and then you're going to have some idiot convince you should write a book. You should not. And then you're going to teach 3 classes at the local university, and you're going to coach the Little League team. And pretty soon you're going to have an 80-hour work week again because you're so afraid of being bored. No. Book yourself so that you have what looks like about 15 hours a week of responsibilities. And stay with me here. I know that sounds like it gives you the heebie-jeebies, anybody who's thinking about retiring. That's not 15 hours. It's more. Why? Because that will make you not rushed. So that means you have 2 or 3 clients that you advise, 1 or 2 people that you're mentoring, 1 nonprofit board and 1 for-profit board that you're sitting on. And so that's, that's what it makes. So you've got stuff that's really, really high value, and everything that you're doing, you can take the time to do it well, maybe for the first time in decades, and you're going to love it. It's going to be fun. It's going to be interesting. You're going to get in better shape. You're going to be around for your wife, but not every day for lunch because she married you for better or for worse, but not for lunch. Yeah. Right. And your life is actually going to get better instead of worse by simply getting rid of the one thing that you hate the most, which is rushing.
That's what's so interesting. Part of why I send it to a fair amount of our advisors and have recommended it is because this business is a business you can do for a long time, right? Yeah. It's not like a manually hard, it's not physical labor. So, that idea, and that's what I saw so much in the book, is this transition into how do you mentor others, right? So how do you bring on a few other advisors that can meet with more people, and you don't have to do it all anymore. So
that's true. I mean, mentoring is something that you're naturally better and better at because of the structure of the brain. Yeah. Early on, everybody listening to us got successful because of something called fluid intelligence. Yep. That's your ability to crack the case, to solve problems autonomously, where you're kind of a cowboy. You're smart. The more you learn, the better you get. Really fast problem-solving skills, really high working memory, innovative capacity. That's what you have in your 20s and 30s. It's in decline by your 40s. Yeah. That doesn't mean you're getting dumber. On the contrary, you're getting another kind of intelligence curve that comes in behind it called crystallized intelligence, which is your wisdom curve. You don't need the working memory for that. You need pattern recognition. You need storytelling capacity. You need talent identification ability. You need to be able to teach. And that's why startup entrepreneurs are 31, but venture capitalists who are making all the money are 61. Mm-hmm. Because one's on the fluid intelligence curve and one's on the crystallized intelligence curve. So everybody watching us as they're getting older, what is my teacher curve, my mentor curve, my storytelling curve? What is it? And how can I walk onto that to go from star litigator to managing partner? What is my version of that? I went from writing this unbelievably sophisticated kind of research so mathematically technical that I can't read it today in my 30s to now I write a column that has 500,000 readers a week that are not scientists.
Yeah.
Because my crystallized intelligence is predominant and I'm trying to use it to the max, but I had to do the research to make sure I was doing that right.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because first time I saw you was more economist side, to see some of the transition. I'll maybe ask this last question, then I want to do just a few quick lightning round questions, but you hit on a few things, and obviously you were in there for an hour, but just for listeners who want to be, I'm going to say this simply, happier, right? And obviously knowing it's a lot of entrepreneurs, just a couple like quick tips on simple things they should be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Number one is stop trying to chase your feelings. That's the number one thing. The idea that happiness is a feeling is very, very disempowering. That's number one. Number two is stop thinking of happiness as a destination. You're not going to be happy. You're going to be happier if you do things right. It's a direction. It's not a destination. You can make progress. But unhappiness is critically important for our functioning. And if you didn't have a lot of bad experiences and negative emotions, you'd be dead. So it's very important to become comfortable with the fact that a lot of life is not happy.
Yeah.
That's a very, very normal thing. Then based on that, you can actually understand that this is something that you can pursue in a very purposive way. Everybody watching us is successful in business. Start getting more successful in the business of managing yourself as opposed to managing the outside world a little bit more. And that comes with understanding the science of emotions. That's what a lot of what I do. Understanding what they are, moving the experience of your emotions to your conscious mind. A lot of what I talked about today was techniques for when you have particular emotions, you have them for a reason. If you let them govern you and hope they go away, if they're negative, that's completely counterproductive. It's to examine them by putting more time into letting your emotions get to the prefrontal cortex of your brain. The CEO suite of your brain is really important. There are a lot of ways to do that, through meditation, through journaling, through therapy, through petitions of prayer. There are a lot of ways to actually technically do that. They're all in the book.
Yeah, and one of the, I had a lot of takeaways. One of my big ones was, don't say anything, count to 30.
Count to 30. Yeah, if you're angry, count to 30. I mean, it's like your grandma said count to 10. She got that, by the way. She didn't know that, but that came from Thomas Jefferson, who one time said, count to 10 if you're angry. If really angry, count to 100. Good advice. But the number, according to science, is 30. 30 seconds is how long it takes for the experience of your emotions to go from your limbic system where they're produced to the prefrontal cortex where you can decide what they mean and how to act optimally. Count to 30 and imagine yourself doing the thing that you wanted to do. And by the time you get to 30, you will not be so hot and you will have saved yourself a trip to HR.
One of the biggest, I mean, why it was just a great reminder, I think early on as a young entrepreneur, I was quick to respond, right? And I remember some people saying like, when you don't like the idea, it's fairly obvious to everyone in the room that you did not like the idea, right? So I think as you mature, like being able to pause. Okay.
Put protocols in place, by the way. So you get a bad email, never answer it on the same day. Never answering a bad email on the same day, unless it's like something that you must by law or whatever it is. But basically, half of the time, the problem will resolve by tomorrow, and it's not your problem anymore.
That's good.
Half of the time, you'll have a perspective on it because you're metacognitive, because your prefrontal cortex will be deciding on it, and you won't feel emotionally about it in the same way. So with written communications, don't answer immediately. Then actually put in place ways to delay when you're answering verbally. So you're not doing lightning rounds. In arguments with your spouse, for example, when it's a really hot hedonic state, that's another way of saying you're really pissed off.
Yeah.
that you basically you have a protocol with the two of you. It's like, this is kind of counterproductive right now. Let's take a quick break. Let's go get something to drink. And then we'll take it up again. And it's just lowering the temperature, systematically lowering the temperature. It's better if your prefrontal cortices are arguing as opposed to your limbic systems.
Well, and I think for entrepreneurs, that's great because so many times we're wired to,
go quick.
So, and it causes problems, right? Especially if you're building a team around it. Okay, you said lightning round. Let's hit lightning round questions because I know you got a hard stop here. Ask these at the end of everyone. I'll start with this one. I think COVID made every leader rethink like what they knew, what they thought, about leadership. Is there one lesson you've taken away from the past few years that you're going to carry forward for the rest of your life?
Yeah, for sure. There is no substitute for in-person contact with people. There is no substitute for it. Now, neurobiologically, it's because we need oxytocin in our brains, which comes from eye contact and touch. But you don't need to know the neurobiology. If you are virtual all the time with everybody, you're going to be lonely. More in-person contact.
It's funny. We made a decision. I made that note when you said that today. we made a decision that we were going to be a work from work company, not a work remote. And so much of it is I was just watching what's happening to people in this, people feeling more and more lonely and disconnected. And I'm like, work is one of the last places left, unfortunately, where people have that human connection.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely the case.
Second question, what did you do to graduate from being good to great in your field?
Part of it is making sure that I'm doing, that I have an order of operations that I'm following. So every company needs an order of operations, and that means what are my goals and what's the order of those goals. Everything's got to fulfill a certain set of goals, but in the order of the order of operations. That will take you from good to great. So I have a company. Yep. I teach at Harvard, but I have a company that actually spreads the science of happiness to as many audiences as I possibly can. I hire people, and when I hire them, or run it myself, but I make sure they're on board with the idea that we do 4 things in this order. When we talk about the science of happiness, we glorify God, we serve others, we have an adventure, and we make a living. That's my order of operations. And that takes me from good to, well, better. Great's subjective, and there are days when I don't feel so great. But certainly we are getting better because we subject this systematically as a team. We say, does this glorify God or not? Does this, okay, good. Does it serve others? Is it fun?
Yeah.
And last but not least, is it actually, are we making a living? But, and making a living can just be a little bit of making a living, as long as the other 3, as long as those things are in order.
That's
order
cool.
of operations.
Yeah, that's great. Third question.
Yeah.
I know you're a big proponent of this, but is there something you're doing to drive your own personal growth this next year that you're excited about?
Right. Now, I know that you can't measure everything about your emotional life and your happiness and your love, but I am a metrics-based guy. And one of the things that I know is that happiness can be broken up into macronutrients. Kind of like your Thanksgiving dinner is protein, carbohydrates, and fat.
Yep.
All food is. Your happiness is a combination of enjoyment, satisfaction, and purpose or meaning. Those are the 3 macronutrients of happiness. To get those things, there's micronutrients. The practices and the habits, we talked about that before, faith, family, friends, and work. But the micronutrients that scale up to that are, your marriage, relationship with your kids, your friendships, your future, your level of optimism, your level of charity, all these micronutrients that feed into it. I have a spreadsheet based on the research of the micronutrients that feed into this macronutrient profile, and I score myself from month to month, semester to semester, and year to year. On my birthday, which is in May, and then my half birthday, which is in November in particular, I just got done with a big scoring approach to see what's fallen off. Wow. And I look across each one of these micronutrients, and I know how important it is in the profile based on its weight, and then the score I give it based on how I feel this year is not how I feel, but how I'm living this year compared to last year. And then I see an aggregate number and sub numbers based on this. And I put together a strategic plan on how my life is going to get better. And sometimes I'm like, I have not been paying enough attention to my marriage. Or, I think I need to be, I need to be calling my friends more. I mean, I'm looking at this. The numbers are the numbers. I got them in black and white. And this is not scaling up in the way that's actually going to give me the sustainable happiness that I want and need, and quite frankly, that I believe I deserve.
Nice. When's your birthday, May?
May 21st.
Oh, okay, May 10th. I'll get that same routine. Okay, 4th question. What is the one? It can't be one of your own books, although everyone should go read those. But what's the one book you've recommended most to other, I'll say entrepreneurs or leaders? The
one book that I've recommended most to entrepreneurs or leaders. I'm going to go old school on this one. I'm going to go back to 1936, and this is a book that everybody read, but most have forgotten. So this is a reread, not a read for most people. How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's a great book, and it sounds like how to twist people to your will. No. It's a book about ethical living on the basis of love, because happiness really is love, and treating people with respect and dignity is the basis of being successful, not because you're trying to trick anybody into your success, but because you're going to get the success on the basis of your virtue and the love you're bringing to others.
It's a great one. Made my son read it last year.
That's wonderful.
It's funny. I actually recognized this, and when people were asking questions, you restated their name a couple times in there, which is a principle of that book for sure. So, final question. We'll get you out of here. Best piece of advice you've ever received?
So the best piece of advice that I've ever gotten was from my dad about how to maintain a good, strong marriage, actually. And that was pray together every day. Just pray together every day, right? Why? Because it's the most intimate thing that you can do. You know, I mean, couples sleep together, but don't pray together.
Yeah.
You know, 30 years in, even if they're really practicing and religious. Now, if you're not religious, everybody watching us, meditate together.
Yeah.
Do something that's deeply meditative together. So, and what are you doing? You're establishing joint metacognition. I could explain all the neurophysiology, whatever. The point is that kind of psychological intimacy is the most important way that you can maintain the link that really matters the most, because this is based on another piece of advice that I give to my students, which is your marriage is the most important business decision you're ever going to make in the business of life.
That's great advice. It's funny. 2 weeks ago at this event I was at, that got brought up, and I think the statistics shared, you would probably know it as economist better, it's like 93% of couples that pray together are still married. Just an incredible
it's incredibly intimate. It's incredible. I mean, my wife and I, we teach married couples that are engaged couples that are getting ready to get married. 30 a month or 30 couples like this a month. And we say, you know, it's like, this is the thing that's going to keep you together, is actually this. I don't bother them with the research. I just say, do that thing.
Good. Arthur, man, I appreciate you taking the time here and just sharing so much with our audience. I appreciate the books because they've been a big influence on me. How can people follow you? I know you write a ton, you know, in the Atlantic, a weekly column, but just what's the best way for people to follow along with you?
ArthurBrooks.com is my website where everything drops. You can get, you know, a beat on if people want to follow on social media. I'm regularly putting content on social media that's affirming and not awful. You know, so it's your source for non-terrible Instagram. And then they also have most of my columns. You can get my columns at theatlantic.com. It's every Thursday morning. How to Build a Life is my column in the Atlantic. And then, you know, once every couple of years I throw out a book. But on the website you can find all the stuff I'm up to, and see me in person sometime. Come say hi.
Thank you. I appreciate you being here, and thanks for all
Cody.
the time.
Right on.